Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session. My name is Gosztonyi. I'm the coordinator, one of the coordinators of the Center of Excellence for Behavior Management, and a psychologist who's worked in schools for many, many years. And I have with me my colleague, Catherine Cora.
Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Welcome. And this session is specifically for those of you that are working with children with many exceptionalities. It's a collaboration with the Center of Excellence for Physical, Intellectual, and Mental Handicaps. And so we're thrilled to do this with them. We are going to focus on a particular aspect of what happens with the students that you care for. Now, one of the things that we're aware of is that there's a huge range. You are dealing with students all who have very severe physical, mental, all sorts of challenges. Many of them are nonverbal, so that's one end of the continuum, all the way up to students who maybe have a multiple series of things that are causing them to have difficulty functioning in the regular classroom. They've ended up in your center, in your school, in your classroom because of the difficulty they're having functioning, but they are verbal and mobile, and so it's going to be really hard for us to necessarily address every one of the questions or concerns that you have. But at the end, we're going to be sharing that we will be having a time for questions and answers. So if you've heard something today, and in the next session that Catherine's going to be offering on resistance, you'll have a chance to come back and ask us some more specific questions, and we'll be joined at that time with our colleagues from the center, with Sarah Lynch and Claudia, and hopefully we'll be able to give you a few more ideas of things that you can do to help your students function to the best of their abilities. And this is really what it is that for myself, whoops, I'm sorry, I ended up with, there we go. For myself, as a psychologist, my passion has been all along of my career is to really help us as people that accompany students, that are teaching students, that are working with students every day, to how to help them become the best that they can be. And when there are multiple layers of difficulties, there are going to be multiple layers of challenges for those of us that are intervening with them. And there's going to be a lot of problems with behavior. And the topic today is emotions are emotions. And I know it's kind of an odd, I was thinking about that, Catherine. I thought, oh, it's kind of an odd title. Why did we say that? Well, I think I said that because there is a tendency in this day and age or a tendency sometimes to want to discount emotions. And I've always felt very strongly, and now the neuroscience is supporting us in that, is that emotions are really at the base of everything that we're doing. And if we don't understand emotions, we're really going to have a hard time working with kids. So that's the purpose here today, is to maybe just go more deeply into that and then have some ideas of what we can help with, especially one of the most difficult emotions, which is frustration. So why do we need to know what's behind and underneath the behavior that we're seeing? Well, obviously something that's going on the outside is telling us that something is going on the inside, and what we see influences what we do. How we see differently is going to cause us to actually act differently, and then we can choose interventions that make a difference and avoid interventions that risk making things worse. And again, I love cartoonists. I think they are some of the best psychologists in the world. Here's Bill Watterson, Calvin telling us, I hate everybody, I'm crabby, leave me alone. Nobody recognizes my hints to smother me with affection. Bill Watterson knew that there was an iceberg underneath that behavior. And it's not always what it seems, and we do really have to try and look underneath. And when we understand what's at the source of the behavior, whether it's emotions like frustration and alarm, or whether it's immaturity, because that's a whole nother thing, then we will have a better understanding of why the behavior is happening and what we can do to help so that the behavior doesn't interfere with that child's ability to function and with the ability of the other children in the classroom to function. We're using the newfound developmental paradigm, which basically looks at maturation as a natural process that's going to happen, even if it might be much slower than other students. In order to mature, you have to be soft, but if you're soft, you're vulnerable. If you're vulnerable, you're going to put on a shell. We won't get into too much of that today, but it will be out there. And of course, what can we do to help students feel safe enough to be able to show their vulnerability? That is attachment, and really looking at the role of emotion in all of these things. And emotions are involved with attachment, with vulnerability, with maturation. So I'm going to start with a definition, and I looked all over the place to see what I could find. I didn't find. I found many, many confusing definitions. I picked one from Wikipedia, which is emotions are psychological states brought on by neurophysiological changes. And that's basically my understanding of it right now from the neuroscience that I've looked at. It stems from the limbic system or the emotional brain. We have primary emotions that are anchored in our limbic system. And there are many researchers who are looking at this. Dr. Neufeld has pulled it together, but there are people like Panksepp and a number of other ones that have looked at different kinds of emotions. And the three ones that we're going to focus on today that are known to be primary emotions, in other words, the limbic system just fires under certain conditions when and these are the emotions that we're often able to name, and they are frustration, alarm, and pursuit. And I'll tell you in a moment what they are. There are also what we call secondary emotions. These are mediated by our cortex. And they're usually a way for us to explain why we are having a primary emotion. And so again, I don't have a lot of time to get into this today, but we basically, with anger, we have frustration, but we're saying who caused the frustration, or did I cause the frustration? That's maybe guilt, or am I the reason for that? Or anxiety, this is why I'm feeling like that. Just to let you know, there is no current scientific consensus on the definition of emotion, so I'm going to stick with the one that I understand the best. When we're looking at cognitive impairments, severe impairments, is it the same? Of course it is. All humans experience emotions. Emotions are universal across all societies. And the limbic system is rarely affected even when there are cognitive impairments. It's possible, but that part of our brain is actually quite protected. And primary emotions are evident non-verbally, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. So where do they come from? Here's the limbic system, the emotional brain, right deep inside of our brain, covered by the cortex. We have three big parts of our limbic system that we need to be aware of. One is the amygdala, which is basically registers threat and is like our smoke detector. No idea how it really works. Many, many factors are involved in it, but even if a door slams, if an alarm goes off, if we smell smoke, our amygdala is going to start firing. And when it fires, it communicates with the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus basically activates our sympathetic nervous system so that we do something about that threat. And they are linked to the hippocampus, which are involved in memory. The thing about the hippocampus is that it tries to remember what's a danger to us. It also helps us move things from short-term memory into long-term memory. But the trouble is, if we're under a lot of stress, our hippocampus can't do the second job. It keeps thinking about what it can do to keep us safe. So one of the reasons why attachment is so important, because attachment actually keeps the brain feeling safe enough to then be able to do the other jobs that it needs to do. When the sympathetic nervous system is activated, now we get cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, growth hormone. These are all pumped into our body. Our heart rate, our blood vessels constrict, our stomach is affected, our heart rate increases, the blood diverts to the muscles so that we can get something done and do something. But these things are meant to go up and down. And one of the problems we're experiencing right now in 2022, as is still in the throes of a pandemic, is we have been feeling this sympathetic nervous system activation quite strongly in our system. Why do we have emotions? Well, primarily they are to ensure our survival. And so therefore, we need to understand what affects us the most. And what affects us the most as human beings is separation or facing separation, which is experiencing the lack of or the loss of closeness with those to whom we are attached or with what we are attached. And this is, I think I'm missing some kind of a something there. But anyway, what I'm wanting to say here is that many of you are dealing with children who are considered to be on the autism spectrum. They tend to get attached to things, to routines. And so when we try to separate them from the routines, they are actually experiencing this primary constellation of emotions that we're going to look at in a moment that are linked to separation. Separation is huge. And what happens when we are facing separation is that the brain is moved to fix the problem. And that exactly is what emotion means. Emotion, it moves. And what does it move us to? Well, three primary emotions. And again, Dr. Neufeld has pulled these together in a chart or in a diagram, but these are now being studied by neuroscientists all over the place. So they are there in the neuroscience. One is called pursuit, which is our desire to restore proximity. We are going to do whatever we can to make the people that we want to be attached to, and in children's case, it's the adults who care for them. We're going to try to please them. And most of you know you have some children who very easily move into pursuit right away. All you have to say to them is, I'm not happy with you. I'm sorry, and they're going to want to try and behave. And that's fine. That works really, really well. There are problems if kids get stuck in that, but it's an emotion that serves well. But there are two other emotions that come with facing separation. One is alarm. And alarm is basically the fear that we will not be taken care of. And when we are in alarm, we tend to be moved to caution or to avoid doing that which alarms, you know, avoid that which alarms. And so again, a lot of these are the kinds of kids we look at them and they might, and we say, I'm not happy with you. We give them the look and they kind of withdraw, they stop talking, they stop moving, they stop doing whatever it was that might have been displeasing you. And again, this is very good. It allows us as the adults to guide our children, to let them know what else to do. But we again have to be careful not to let our kids get stuck in alarm either. And then the third emotion, and this is the one that tends to cause the most problems, is a very powerful emotion called frustration, by which we are moved to effect change and to fix the problem. And again, in 2022, as having lived through 2 years of pandemic, if we did not have the emotion of frustration, the scientists who have basically worked on finding ways to keep us healthy and to restore us to health would not have been able to do what they did, because it's a hugely strong, motivating emotion. It moves us to try and fix things. But sometimes it can get in our way, and we'll see a little bit later how that happens. Now, emotions are kind of like an action potential that has energy that seeks expression. And so once it gets started, it's got to find a way out. And the interesting thing here is that this way out, it kind of it builds up a little bit like static electricity. If some of you remember when we used to have a lot of carpets around, how we didn't know that it was inside of us, but then we would touch the light fixture, and it would come out. And that's what emotions are like. They have this movement. Um, Now, emotions can be expressed in many ways, and we all know that. They can be expressed in nonverbal ways and verbal ways, physically, and they can also be identified through changes in skin color, general agitation, dilation of the eyes. Many of you are already quite aware when an emotional state has been kind of provoked or evoked in your students. It's easier if the student will say something to us, but all of you can figure this out. So I have a couple of little worksheets here, which I won't actually give you time to fill in, but I encourage you to go back afterwards and consider these, because we need to be aware, what are the signs that students give that emotions are rising? What do they say? And we're going to see later on, going to do a little case study at the end, and I'm going to show you how this particular student let us know that emotion was rising within him. What are the nonverbal signs? What are the paraverbal signs? So paraverbal is the quality of how the voice is, the tone, the whine, the higher pitch or the lower pitch. Are there some physical signs? What are the other signs that your students are giving you that something is going on for them emotionally? Very, very important, especially with the nonverbal students as well, for us to learn to read those signs. Now, we're going to look particularly at the emotion called frustration, which is the experience of something not working, which can move us to move us as human beings to do things that we often call aggression or attack. And we're going to look at mostly at the word attack, but we use the word aggression because aggression is very destabilizing. It upsets people. And when we are looking at things that don't work, we again need to do things, and this isn't on your handout, but I just thought of this as I was going through it today, and I thought, this is what we need to call this. We need for every one of our students to remind ourselves of their frustration inventory. You know how many things frustrate them. You know that, but sometimes we forget. And I often have an activity where I ask people, and you might want to do this afterwards, put your timer on and just give yourself 1 minute or 2 minutes to list all the things that can go wrong between the time the child wakes up in the morning and the time that they actually get to school. So what are all the things that don't work for them in just in the morning? And usually people can give me 20 in 2 minutes. Then what frustrations are added in the classroom? What frustrations are added in a learning situation? And then we're going to, in a moment, look at the whole topic of attachment frustration. And we need to be aware of those as well. What's not working in the child's attachment world? Now, of the many things that you could have listed, here are some that just came to the top of our minds when Catherine and I were working through this. Having to do things you don't want to do, not being able to do the things you want to do, always depending on others to have needs and wants met, a body that won't cooperate, sensory overload, schoolwork is hard, not being the same as others, not being accepted by peers, not being able to let people know what's going on with you, or not being understood when you let them know, an environment that prevents you to go to get involved in activities, etc., etc., etc. And you know that there are many, many frustrations. And what we have to remember is that these are things that are in the bottom part of this iceberg. Now, one thing we need to understand is that an emotion only becomes a feeling when it is felt or when it becomes conscious. And part of what we're going to look at today is how to help your students to become conscious of what's going on underneath, because emotion like frustration has adrenaline, cortisol, the heart rate, all this stuff is going on. And when it comes to consciousness and it becomes a feeling, some way our student needs to be able to let us know something is not working for me. But emotions are not always felt. However, they still exist. And that's very important for us because sometimes the student won't even look frustrated, but we need to understand if there's a lot of stuff not working for them, this is going on underneath in their emotional world. Now, Dr. Neufeld said, he said to himself, well, wait a minute, not everybody who's frustrated is going to attack. So how else do we get out from frustration? And so we're going to look at the idea of a traffic circle when there are a number of different ways out. But before we get there, I just want to alert you to the fact that added to the regular frustrations of every day comes a whole category of frustrations that we call attachment frustration, which arises when those who are meant to care for us are not able to do it, either because we're separated from them or for a whole bunch of other reasons. And it's one of our most fundamental sources of frustration. Some of the kids that come to school, people have often said to me, Eva, I don't understand. It's a fresh day. We're starting again. Why is the student like already so upset? Well, because first of all, there's already been the frustration inventory, but added to that are things that are not going on in their life. And some of these students experience things that have affected them quite profoundly from their very early days. Frequent hospitalizations, parents arguing, especially around the stress of caring for, being rejected by the parents or feeling like you're a burden, never feeling good enough, where there's a lot of focus on trying to fix what's wrong with you and too many strangers, always feeling as if, your parents are going to leave you with somebody else because they can't take care of you. Parents not living together and not getting along, being rejected by siblings, a parent having a new partner, birth of a sibling, separation from biological parents and being in foster care, or even adverse childhood experiences. Bottom line here is this adds to the frustration load, and frustration is a very powerful emotion, and when it gets going, it can really erupt, and we know that. So what's the first way of getting out of the traffic circle? Well, the first way is what frustration was ultimately meant for, which was basically to change something. And again, a lot of you already, student starts to get frustrated. You notice that they're frustrated. They try and let you know what needs to be changed, and you do it. Not a problem. The hard part is to imagine all of the things that need changing when a child is experiencing so many exceptionalities. But most of you are really starting to get that. The thing is that there are many, many times when there's nothing we can do about it. And we call that hitting the wall of futility. Now, hitting the wall of futility should move us into the next exit of frustration, which is basically adaptation. But in order to move into adaptation, you have to feel your sadness and you have to be able to tolerate vulnerability. Another way of looking at it is that feelings of frustration need to turn to feelings of futility. Mad needs to turn to sad. And when that happens, actually, we go from sympathetic nervous system action because we're trying to change something. Now we can't change it. Now our amygdala, somewhere along the line, kind of realizes that you've hit this wall and can tolerate the vulnerability of not being able to do that. And now when we make that switch, we can go into our parasympathetic nervous system. And our parasympathetic nervous system allows us to go and access other parts of our brain and find another solution. But and actually the tears allow the toxins to come out, because when you have got adrenaline and cortisol in your system and you don't need them anymore, they are actually toxins. But the futility actually has to sink in before the adaptation can happen. And adaptation, and this requires an energy shift. And you'll know when your student has hit a wall of futility, because they're going to be trying to change something, and when mad does turn to sad, they kind of, oh, and they feel that sadness. And that is a very good thing, because then that leads to adaptation. And adaptation leads to resilience. But adaptation is an emotional process by which we are changed by that which we cannot change. But it requires a soft heart and a safe place to cry. And we have to be able to tolerate vulnerability, and we have to have someone with whom we can feel safe. Now, I am really hoping that many of your students feel safe enough with you to have their tears with you, because when they are living in a world that does not work, oh my goodness, do they ever need to have their tears. Unfortunately, for some of our students, they've had too much separation, too much shame, too much alarm. And this can happen also to students without exceptionalities. All these stresses happen, and that softness, which allows for the feelings of futility to come out, which allow for adaptation to happen, the process gets disrupted, because when it doesn't feel safe to depend or feel vulnerable, when it's not safe to express what I'm feeling, when the world is too overwhelming and there's no one who can keep me safe. And again, many of your students on the autism spectrum, we don't understand how incredibly disturbing the world is to them. They put on this shell, and when they put on the shell, now the tears dry up. And when the tears dry up, we are no longer able to use that frustration to be transformed, and now the frustration turns foul. And this is where the attack comes from. Now, there's one more thing that happens in between, and this is called mixed feelings, or the ability to temper our desire to attack. And any of you that perhaps have children of your own, or any other experience as a spouse, you know how this works. Because there are times when you are not happy with them, when you feel like saying or doing things that you're not happy about. But because of your ability to have mixed feelings, which are a tempering element, to have the ability to think, on the one hand, on the other hand, I'm frustrated, but oh my goodness, if I do what I think I'm going to do, that's not a good thing. Or I want to attack, but I really like this person. I remember one time being really frustrated with my husband and just thinking, oh my goodness, I just feel like right now I'm just going to do something, and no, but I really love him. So we remember those things, that we have an impulse, but we know there's going to be a consequence. Then we have a violent urge, but we have nonviolent intentions. We have an impulse to hurt, but we have caring impulses. Now, one of the things we have to understand is this is tied to the development of the prefrontal cortex. And as you know, many of your students have difficulties in that area. They have difficulty they're often diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, impulse problems. And so it's really important to understand that when that part of the brain is not developing well, that tempering element isn't always there in the way that it needs to be. Now, the point of the tempering element is that it's meant to help us to find another way out. And so we just go around the traffic circle and either find a way to change, find our adaptation, try and find ways to lessen our frustration, and so on and so forth. And of course, when those mixed feelings aren't there, and especially if we have a lot of defenses against vulnerability, then we are prone to attack. And why do we have this lack of mixed feelings? Well, again, immaturity, because the prefrontal cortex is not functioning the way that it should, either because of our youth, and we have a lot of young kids in our schools right now because there's a developmental delay, or because the experiences that the child has had cause delays in the development of the prefrontal cortex. Or, and all of us have experienced this, our emotions overwhelm our tempering elements. Too much emotion, too much frustration building up, and it comes over. And again, many of you have probably had that experience. You've gone home, you've had a frustrating day, you don't mean to take it out on your own family, but all of a sudden, boom, it comes out because our prefrontal cortex gets tired and our emotions can overwhelm our prefrontal cortex. And then some of our students have what we call a kindled amygdala, which means that their basically their smoke detector is very, very sensitive because they've had too many things happen to them. And so now the smoke detector, we call it having a kindled amygdala, fires as though danger is always imminent. There's a rapid escalation. They go from mildly anxious to feeling threatened to feeling terrorized. We call that kind of out of the blue. And I'm sure many of you have had that experience. And the focus at that moment is on nonverbal, on the tone of voice, on body language, facial expression, inability to understand words, and really you become a being of sensation. So we have to be very careful because at that moment in time, talking, reasoning, talking about consequences or rewards really doesn't work because they are just in survival mode. And the words just keep them in high arousal and they can't process things. And so it doesn't really work very well. And we have to understand that many of our reactions and things that we think are going to help students don't really work that well. Because when a student, for example, lashes out at us and we give them a consequence or a sanction, it actually increases the frustration because they're meant to be frustrating. You know, since you have such a hard time, uh, difficult time handling frustration, let me give you more. Now, we do have to sometimes give consequences for the other students, but not because it's going to make a difference for this student. Because as we know, there's way more going on underneath. There's a brain that's not functioning well. There's emotions that are coming up. So just the last little thing that I want to say here, and then we're going to get into what we can do, is why do consequences and also rewards, why do they work sometimes? Well, if we remember these three emotions, what we need to understand is that they are usually felt one at a time. And emotions can displace one another, but they are still there. So what we have to be careful of is we can sometimes stop frustration, but the frustration especially will be expressed at another time or in another place. So if we go back to the traffic circle, what happens here is that the alarm can stop the frustration. So but the attack will go somewhere else, and it can go to siblings, it can go to pets, it can go to others, it can go to the self, it can go to things, it can go to the parents, or it can go to the person that the student feels the safest with. They will be very good for somebody else. And then here you are, the person who takes care of them, that they have the best relationship with, and boom, the frustration comes out because the brain sort of says, okay, this person is safe enough. So alarm can displace it. And this is the trouble with consequences and maybe even something like timeout, is that they can provoke the alarm, which then displaces the frustration. They hold on. And especially if we say to them, like, do you want me to call your mother or do you want me to call so-and-so, or I'm going to take away that reward. Okay, now they're going to go into pursuit to keep that going, but the frustration will still be underneath. Or if we say to them, you need to go away until you have to behave. So it can change it in the moment, but it's going to erupt somewhere else. and it's likely to happen over something trivial. We have to be so careful because many of these kids continue to get in trouble throughout the day because we have actually only stopped the frustration and not dealt with the frustration. Similarly with pursuit, and this is particularly where rewards come in, because in order to earn a check mark, pursuit will displace frustration. They hold the frustration to earn the reward, but this only changes the behavior in the moment. It doesn't deal with the emotions, and it doesn't deal with the brain. So it'll erupt somewhere else, or the student will lose it if they're not getting what they think they deserve, and they end up in a vicious cycle and often a lot of shame. And the rewards really don't recognize that it can't help a student's brain to mature, nor does it recognize how powerful emotions are. And a lot of these kids just can't hold it together, even if you have a well-functioning reward system. And we have a session on that at our on our website. So what am I supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? And again, I understand that for some of you, it's a chronic ongoing problem with many of these students, but I think some of these things will help you. So first of all, we're going to focus on the aggression problem, which is all the things that are in the blue box, rather than on the behavior. And we're going to try and be more understanding of what we see. So rather than just thinking this behavior has to stop, what we have to say is, oh my goodness, there's too much frustration, too much not working in this student's life. And then really our biggest question is, how can I help the student deal with overwhelming frustration? And I work a lot at St. Raphael's School, which is a school at English Montreal dedicated for children with behavior problems. And they found that when they made this switch, when they started to see the behavior as coming from frustration, their whole attitude changed. So this is what we're going to do. We are going to work with the traffic circle, and we're going to start off with trying to figure out what to do with frustration, and then look at some of the other intervention points that we have as well. So first of all, and all of you do this naturally and normally, the hardest part is anticipating it enough. What things are going to be frustrating for this child? What can I do? Can I take charge of certain decisions so that that doesn't cause them problems? Can I prevent problematic situations? Can I limit the time with peers or choose the peers that for whom it works the best? There are many, many times when we just have to basically manage the child's environment. We really want to be thinking about directing traffic rather than policing. We want to deal with the frustration problem by prevention, not by consequences. And timeout, sadly, is one of the things that causes a lot of frustration for kids, because when they are sent away from us, of course they want to behave, but the frustration goes. And so if a child can feel their sadness in their timeout, then they'll be able to come back and figure things out. But many of these kids do not feel their sadness, that they don't have that prefrontal cortex that works when they need it to work. So they might have good intentions, but they can't actually do it. And for some of these kids, if they spend too much time in timeout, they start to feel way too vulnerable. They put on the shell, and when they put on the shell, we can't help them. So we try and use time away, which means we send the child to someone. If we can't handle them anymore, is there someone they can go to? Is there a nurturing support center in your school? Is there a dignified way, if the child is mobile, obviously, to have them leave, send them on an errand? Or if we can, let's create a safe spot, a quiet corner, and then let the student know we'll be there. And we need to always repair the relationship with the student. Quiet corners can be helpful for some students. Some of you have sensory rooms, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But sometimes just giving the child, and this is a comfortable place, and maybe it will help the child to just basically feel less isolated, but also give them the time that they need to basically just have the emotions dissipate a little bit, and then we can work with them, and we'll talk in a moment to how we can work with that. We need to help them develop a relationship with frustration. Just that shift to it's not working. It's normal, even for us, when things aren't working, to want to do something about it, sometimes even to want to attack. we need to help them, especially for those students with whom we can have a conversation. What's not working in your life right now? And very often they will start telling you, and then, oh my goodness, I didn't realize it was such a hard day for you today. Okay, let's see what we can do about it. Teach that language. You're frustrated. This isn't working for you. This isn't what you had in mind. You tried so hard and it didn't turn out. And once the student starts using this language, and by the way, you can use this through, hopefully you can find ways of helping the student to communicate this non-verbally, then you have to honor it. Because if the student, for example, and I'm sorry if this example doesn't make sense to you, but this is what I have seen happen. If the student has a communication board and there's a place there where things are not working, and they take their hand and they pound, okay, on that little spot, it's not working, it's not working. I guess that wouldn't work if you had an iPad, but I'm thinking of, if you had a sort of a printed communication board. We have to be very careful not to say to them, well, you shouldn't be pounding it, because they're letting us know that they're frustrated and they're pounding on the board rather than pounding on someone else. So we have to be very careful to honor when the student is starting to tell us it's not working for them. And we need to find ways to help them to vent, get things out. And sometimes we need to show them how to do this. So come alongside when the frustration is mild and show them another way to do it. If a child is in a wheelchair, maybe we create a little thing, something that they can bang on that isn't going to hurt their hand or hurt someone else. And we encourage these times for venting. Some of our students have so much pent up frustration in them. We have to find ways of helping them to get it out on a regular basis throughout the day. And this is where play comes in. And then we also can do by modeling, using times of strong connection to show them how to do it, and to lead them to their good intentions. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment as well. For some of our students, we have created what we call an emotions room. And this is a place to let it out, not a place to calm down. Some of them will let it out and they will be able to calm down. Some of them, but it's really not about calming them down. It's about giving them permission to let it out. And in these rooms, we provide pool noodles, we provide bubble wraps for stomping, stuffed animals for throwing, balls for kicking, boards for scribbling on, paper for ripping. This room, by the way, is what they use in St. Raphael. They've got pillows there. The kid can hit on the pillows. And also we have a big exercise ball, and that actually is as much for the adults as it is for the kids. Sometimes the kids want to hit us, but we can put the ball between us and the child and eventually guide them to the other tools that they can use. But this way, at least they're not hurting us. Just to make a quick difference about some of the rooms that are maybe available for students, and in my ideal school we would have all of these rooms would be available except the last one, which I'm not too thrilled about, but these ones we would have sensory rooms, and these are often prescribed by occupational therapists. I know that at Eastern Township School Board they call them engine rooms, where there's all sorts of ways in which these are used as a preventative measure with an adult to provide that deep muscle release, and it helps, which really helps the emotions to get out. And again, just look up sensory rooms. There's many, many examples, and I'm sure most of you already know what they are. Then there's a calming room, and there is a place. Some students, when they start to get a little bit agitated, they can go, and a snoozlin was one of the ones that was developed, expensive, but you can set up your own equivalent of it. And for some students, they just need before like all the environmental frustrations kick in, they need a place where they can go and cut out those environmental things. It helps calm the nervous system when there's sensory overload, especially. But from what I understand, it's usually child directed. So when the child goes into the room, they decide what it is that's helpful to them to get their system calmed down. Then we have our emotions room, which are basically used to give emotions a safe place to release with an adult. And the adult is either in the room with the child or close by. But you can't use a calming room or a sensory room as an emotions room because they're all for different kinds of things. The last one, which only should to be used if a student is a significant danger to self and others, is an isolation room. Not recommended by the ministry. There is a new document coming out, which when it comes out, we will be letting you know about. But really, children should not be left in a room by themselves when they cannot get out of it, and an isolation room shouldn't be used for teaching a child a lesson or consequencing them. It only is when we have to keep them safe, or from running out onto the street or something like that. So we do not recommend isolation rooms for the most part. We have to let kids play, and play actually is the most amazing way of letting emotions out. Again, we've done a whole session on that. I'm just going to focus on how we turn frustration into play. Well, the first thing is we want to try and make things work. So it's important if a student is able to construct, to use Lego, to build blocks, even to organize things. And with some of our ASD students, how they like to line things up. That's their way of that's another way of their frustration coming out. They're organizing their world. Oh, my world works now. Everything's in a row. We need to leave space for that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's one way of the system trying to basically balance itself. When students can't make their world work, let's give them a chance to make other things work. The sad thing is so many of our students are deprived of as much playtime as they should have. Also, we should allow time for attacking and destroying impulses to happen in a playful way. And a lot of our normal kids can go out and play in recess, and they play attacking games, and they yell and they scream and they let it out. Well, how can we help some of our students who don't have that opportunity to do it? And we can do it by, putting on some loud music and letting the body do it, writing frustrations on a paper and making balls to throw, or having snowball fights with paper, or pool noodle drumming, clapping games, stomping dancing, drumming on the table, allowing some time for play fighting with pool noodles, or even some attacking games, with little toys. If they're attacking in play, they're less likely to be attacking in real life. We've kept our kids from playing out their attacking impulses and actually inadvertently increased aggression among our young children. And then many of our brain breaks kind of fall into this as well. So we need to find ways to help the student to move their body. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on the importance of tears, and hoping, especially for those of you that are able to work one-on-one with students, that bit by bit, I mean, honestly, with some of your students with large exceptionalities, they literally need to be crying 2-3 times a day. It's only when the tears are able to flow that the brain can kind of readjust itself. I'm not saying you're going to cure these kids, but it's amazing how much more they can do if they pass through the process of adaptation. So we have a couple of jobs around that. One of them is being the agent of futility. We can't take things away, and so we need to actually be with them, first of all, in their emotion, and we need to reflect it back. With frustration particularly, we need to match their frustration. That didn't work for you. That wasn't what you had in mind. You wanted me to do this. Like, let them know that you understand how hard that emotion is inside of them, and that you get it. And the only way you can do that is not only through your words, but through the paraverbals that are there. You match that emotion, and then you become the angel of comfort. Oh, that wasn't what you had in mind. It just didn't work for you today. And you subtly move them to sadness, allowing a tinge of sadness in your voice. Now, for some students, that's going to freak them out and stop them and whatever. But bit by bit, if you keep doing this, bit by bit, you can actually bring students to their tears. And again, it's so important because there's so much stuff that's not working, and we have to bring them into that place of sadness and adaptation. Now, when they start crying, now if you're the one that moved them there, then you're probably not going to ask why. You're just going to be happy that they actually followed your lead into their sadness. But if sometimes students will find you and just burst into tears when they see you, and many people have said to me, I don't know what to do. I feel so badly. There, honey, now don't cry. No, no, no. Or why are you crying, sweetie? Well, if even the verbal kids don't really know why they're crying, because they're crying at that sea of tears, all the things that didn't work for them. And then they'll try and give you a good enough reason, and then we try and argue with them about whether that reason is good enough. Just believe there is a sea of tears that need to be cried inside of there. And when they start crying, just let it all flow. And now here's the really hard part, because we all have really strong alpha instincts. It breaks our heart when we see a child cry, and we want to take that sadness away. But if you understand and honor deeply the role of sadness and tears, then you're going to say to your alpha instincts that want to take it away, give the space. That's the best thing you can do at that point. Give lots of space to sadness and tears. Just give it time, and it goes in a wave as well. It goes down, 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 and then it goes up, up, up. And when it comes up, that might be the time to problem solve if that's what you can do. And the last thing that I'm going to say here is solicit good intentions, help, and many of you already do this with your students, but get them ask for help when you're frustrated. On your communication board should be help. I'm getting frustrated to I am frustrated. To communicate their frustration, to find other ways of getting that attacking energy out, and do the coaching and supporting that you do. Help them practice alternate behaviors, and you often do this. The visual supports when this is happening, then this happens. Social stories, modeling and practicing the skills. And just one little thing I want to say about visual supports. Um, Again, be a little bit careful of the color red and too many angry faces, because that can seem very negative to a child, especially some of your more highly functioning kids. There's nothing wrong with frustration. It's not a bad emotion. It just needs to be tamed, but it's not a bad emotion. And for some kids, red means bad. And so what we need to remember is the ability to apply what we know or to temper ourselves is a function of the prefrontal cortex, but it can be easily hijacked by emotion. So here are all the ways in which we can help. Now, if a student continues to get into trouble, we can take things away from them. We can keep things from them doing things. We can limit the use. We can put a structure in to prevent problems. We can even take it away. But we're not taking it away because we think it's going to change the behavior, but we're going to take it away because it's in the child's best interest. There's a classroom that they set up in San Rafael for 4 and 5-year-olds who had severe frustration problems. I basically said, don't even put any toy in that room that if it's thrown could hurt somebody else. Well, what if the kid wants to play with, a truck that's metal? Well, take that away from them, because if they throw that metal truck, they're going to hurt somebody else. If they hurt somebody else, you have to put in a consequence. So just don't have it there. It's really around understanding. And it's not that we were going to fix that kid by not giving him a metal truck. We're going to help that child by all of the interventions that we have. Just very quickly to show you kind of how we do this, I'll give you a case study of a student that I knew way back when, in probably about 25 years ago. He was in grade 1, struggling with reading, showed signs of an autism spectrum, but was not yet diagnosed. Became agitated, had a hard time following rules. His language skills were poor, and boy, when he got agitated, he would just repeat words and sentences over and over and over again. And that's how we knew, one of the ways we knew he was getting agitated. And I happened to be in the school when Greg was getting into trouble, and the principal was called because he was threatening his teacher with a long pointer stick and insisting that she let him have his lunch bag in the classroom. And it was getting so this is one of the ways that I recommend that you kind of try and analyze what's going on with your students. And again, we're going to do another session on this. We're going to add a bonus session on how to do this analysis. But just very quickly, and I'm sure this will make sense to you. What's the problem? Refusing to put the lunch bag away and threatening the teacher with a stick. When did it happen? Well, it happened first thing in the morning in the classroom with the classroom teacher. Now, this was the ideal circumstance. The child was well rested. He was in a safe place. He was with somebody that he knew. Imagine if it was a substitute teacher. Oh my goodness, how much more frustrating it could be for that kid. He was asked to put his lunch in the bag in his locker. The pacing, the agitation, the repetition of words, the possible trigger was being separated from his lunch, but there were other factors as well. He has this rigid thinking. Does he have ASD? And we found out later there was a lot of parental conflict going on. So now, why did the lunch bag become important? Because it was a representation for other stuff that he couldn't manage in his life. So what did the school do? And again, I know this is a simple kind of a case, but I really, this was way before I met Dr. Neufeld, but when I heard this, when the teacher said what she said to me, when they finally sat down and said, okay, what are we going to do differently? I so admired her because she got it. Of course, they had to suspend him. He did an act that was quite violent and scared the other kids. But that day he was away was the day in which the teacher and everyone we do differently. And basically, the teacher said, you know what? Greg kept telling me, I need to see my lunch. I need to see my lunch. I need to see my lunch. Well, she said, you know what? I can let him see his lunch. I'll put it on his desk, as long as he doesn't eat it. And he was a very rule following kid. He knew he shouldn't eat it. He just couldn't let it out of his sight. And she did. Now, just one little add on here. This was many years ago. He was eventually diagnosed with an ASD. There was also an intellectual delay. There was a lot of family turmoil, sadly. And during his academic career, of course, we had to make a lot of accommodations for him. But I just want you to know that as a young adult, he represented Canada at the Special Olympics in Japan, and he won 3 medals. And to this day, he still writes me emails. So you can come a long way even if you act like Greg did, with the understanding of the adults around you. So basically, our intervention principles are maximize the attachment relationship, respect and compensate for the level of immaturity, protect vulnerability, come alongside emotional experience by allowing emotional expression and encouraging a play. And these are the ways in which we can work with behavior at its roots for lasting change. Again, just another little way of thinking about this. How does behavior change? Well, behavior changes as the brain matures. And some of your students, their brain isn't going to mature until they're well into their 30s or 40s, or maybe later on. Maturation will happen. It's just going to be a long, slow process. Vulnerability, the brain changes when vulnerability is protected. When we honored what Greg wanted us to do, when we let him see his lunch, then he could handle that. And that came through attachment. Behavior changes when students are attached to adults and when they believe that the adults will care for them. And finally, behavior changes when emotions are felt. So as many of you know, we have a website, 2 parts to our website, even a members part. The password is CEBM members, all in one word, written as it is there. I believe this one is on your handout. So go and visit our site. Lots of stuff there that you can, all sorts of other explanations of the things that I glossed over very quickly. Just to let you know, there is an evaluation, and Catherine's going to post it in the chat. And also, we're going to have the regular session through Center of Excellence for just the general public on helping the student who is disruptive and alarmed. On April the 6th, Catherine will be walking you through an understanding of counterwill and resistance for students with exceptionalities. And we've just confirmed with our colleagues at PIM, Claudia and Sarah, that we will be doing a panel in which I'll present in a little bit more detail kind of an analysis for intervention. We'll be doing a Q&A, and maybe actually those of you who know Sarah and Claudia, if you have 1 or 2 cases that you're really concerned about, maybe you could write to them. I'm sorry, I don't have their email address here, but if you know them, you know their email address. Send them some case studies, and then we can do an analysis of those case studies so that we can really unpack other ways in which to help these kids deal with a load of emotion that can really sometimes cause them so many problems, and that we can actually truly help them with. So hopefully that was helpful. And we have a few minutes for questions. So if you have something.
I put Sarah's email in the chat as well as the survey. I'll just stop the recording.
All right, thank you.